reasons that people give, most commonly for trans people not being, eligible to compete with cis people is due to biological advantages. So the idea is that cis men have biological advantages over trans men, and that trans women have biological advantages over cis women. Now, do you know anything about this, either of you? Anything about any of these sort of topics? Because there are a lot of things that come into it, but do you know anything about these sort of biological advantages?
The only one I know off the top of my head is there's a bunch of conversations around bone structure or bone density or something like that.
Yes.
It's the only thing I know off the top of my... Oh, and obviously muscle density, things like that.
Obviously.
Yeah. But that's the only things I really know about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read what's in front of me, but Schuyler, if you've got anything you want to add or you want to jump in and correct me, by all means, please do. So With the bone density there, bones aren't muscles, right? Bones don't sort of contribute to movement in the same way that muscles do. Your bone density, from what I've seen, and there's all of these sources down below, they're not contractile tissue. They don't have a hugely meaningful effect on transferring force. If your bones are dense enough to not be, injured whilst competing, that's about it. Beyond that, it doesn't cause a lot of differences to create any meaningful advantage.
Shocker.
And as far as I'm aware as well, if that was the case, then black women would have a biological advantage over a cis black women would have a biological advantage over cis white men.
They got strong bones.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you know what I mean? But you don't see that being a thing that is brought up.
Get them out.
Yeah, but I mean, is that on track, Schuyler?
Yeah, actually, from what I understand too, and with the research I've read, that is accurate. Something to consider as well. So what you said, I think I want to highlight. Bone density matters insofar as you don't have osteopenia or osteoporosis, right? So as long as you don't have bones that are more likely to fracture, then as long as you have like decent bone density, after that you have functioning bones, and that's what's valuable. The thing about having high bone density, let's say that one does have high bone density, with trans women, what people will argue is that they have bigger bone structures, more bone density, and are stronger, blah blah blah. The reality actually is that yes, trans women do have larger frames on average if they've gone through testosterone driven puberty, but they also are going through testosterone suppression in order to compete, which means they have a smaller amount of muscle to power a larger frame. Think about a large car with a small engine. That's actually a disadvantage. Yeah. So people don't consider actually the full frame of the science. They just say trans women are taller. But if you've got a taller person with a smaller muscle frame, right, on average, then you actually have a disadvantage.
Yeah, and let me preempt the comments that are coming in to correct you here. First off, I'm sure they'll be saying that women have fragile bird bones. No, I'm joking. No, what they'll be probably...
That's also not true.
No, obviously not true. Yeah, no, what they'll be saying is probably something along the lines of, cis men or anyone that has gone through a testosterone-driven puberty having stronger muscles. Their muscles just being naturally more inherently strong. And I feel like that's something that you were kind of hinting towards, Luke.
Well, the one thing, this is off of one video I saw by, what's her name, Hofstadter?
Sabina.
As far as I remember, so tell me if I'm wrong, as far as I remember, she was saying about how trans women didn't lose muscle density as much as trans men gained it.
Okay, so I know the study you're talking about. I've actually got a video in the description that will basically go through that whole study and talk about the pros and cons and what conclusions we can draw from it. It's from Jangles. He's very good. He actually has, the qualifications to back him up on this, so very much you could trust that he knows what he's talking about, and even if you don't trust him, which you shouldn't just trust him, he's got the sources to back him up as well. So the thing about muscles and muscle mass is that muscle mass itself isn't the most important thing. If you're a bigger person, you're going to have more muscle because you're bigger. It's about lean body mass, basically what in your body is not fat, and on top of that, the actual muscle mass and density isn't the sort of most important thing here, because what has more of an effect is hemoglobin, right? as in you know what hemoglobin is, right?
Carries all the oxygen.
Exactly.
In the blood.
It's the protein that
Kind
carries
of
oxygen in your
necessary,
blood.
yeah.
And okay, I've got up here in front of me a 2021 review found that trans women's muscle mass remains high after transitioning, but their levels of hemoglobin, the oxygen carrying protein in blood, were comparable to cisgender women.
And drops within 120 days of hormone suppression as well.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So people will be saying, "Oh, but more muscles mean stronger and faster." No, because muscle mass isn't necessarily the limiting factor. And the picture that you're probably going to be noticing as we go through this episode is that these sort of things that are these accusations that are cast at trans athletes are not based strictly on science and the results of studies, or the results of reputable studies, or the results of studies that can actually be applied to athletes. They're picking out little things that feel like they should matter, and they're not actually looking into whether they have, they sort of confer any significant advantage. For example, if you ever see a study that claims anything about athletes and is looking at the average person, I'm not going to say disregard it, but
disregard it.
Disregard it.
It's really the thing that people also are missing is that most, if not 99% of the research that people are talking about when they're talking about excluding trans people, so the citations on many of these rules that are attempting to exclude trans people are not actually studying trans people.
Yeah, they're
studying cisgender people. They're studying the differences between cisgender men and cisgender women, which is not relevant to the inclusion of trans women and trans men. Right. First of all. Second of all, when the most of the studies that they're studying for trans people are not studying athletes. And in those studies, they explicitly say this should not be expanded to athletes because these are not elite athletes. And so there's actually only one really researcher who's studying trans people in sports, specifically in elite sports. And her name is Joanna Harper, and she's also a trans person. And her research supports that 1 year of testosterone suppression is enough to mitigate any, quote, advantages of testosterone. If testosterone is the only thing that creates an, quote, advantage in sport, which we also know it really isn't. There's been, many studies on elite level, so just elite level, Olympic level athletes, and their testosterone levels are all over the map, even the cis men, right? The sort of average range for cis men goes from about 200 nanograms per deciliter all the way up to like 945. You all are in the UK, so use nanomoles, but just pretend for right now, 200 to 900 or so. And cis men are all over that in the Olympics. So there's, a lot of the research that they're using, like you said, Corey, muscle mass, the person is stronger or whatever. That's not necessarily true. And by the way, even if somebody is stronger, they might not be better at a sport.
Absolutely,
and I think that's also really important to recognize is that biological differences might not always confer biological advantages.
And the key point that I want to hit on here, because you're so correct. The key point I want to hit on is that this survives purely based on what feels right to some people, right? It feels right that being bigger and stronger would mean you're better at sports, right? It feels right that having a larger lung capacity would mean an increased performance because you can get more oxygen in your body. If you're it's VO2 max is the maximum oxygen that you can get into your body, but that's not the bloody limiting factor. The limiting factor is the muscles around the lungs and the heart's ability to basically pump the blood around your body. So having a larger lung capacity, sure, it could have an effect, but it's not the limiting factor, so just one person having larger...
but even beyond that, I know we're here to talk about the science and biological differences, but when people think about advantages in sport, you know what the biggest advantage in sport? Socioeconomic advantage. Access to sport, right? Nobody is fighting tooth and nail. There aren't hundreds of bills trying to create access for people to play sports, but that is a primary limiting factor. And for women and girls in women's sports, there's the Women in Sports Foundation has a report that shows all of the barriers for women in sports. Guess what? Trans women don't appear once on that list. What does appear is financial disadvantage, not having the funding. 70 to 80% of colleges in the NCAA in the US don't actually even meet Title IX, which is the rule that requires schools to have equal resources for men's and women's sports, mostly financially speaking. And 70 to 80% of schools don't even meet that, right? And we've got all these people complaining about the one trans woman who competed in the NCAA last year. And I think we need to really understand that, I think the biology is important and we can talk about that. And it also supports the inclusion of trans women. If you go beyond that, though, there are so many other factors that are very, very unfair. And people are like, well, we are protecting fairness in sport. Fine. Then make sure that everybody has access to sport. Make sure that 64% of black children in the United States that can't swim learn how to swim, right? And the fact that that's rooted, they don't know how to swim, not because black people can't swim, but because of segregation and slavery. Right? The history of not having pools in black neighborhoods, right?
Oh, man.
And so there's so much here, but I just, when we talk about biology, it's not that I want to ever dismiss biology, because people accuse me that all the time. Oh, Schuyler, you're just trying to like erase science. I'm not. I love science. I'm trying to make sure that we understand the complexity of science that goes beyond our physical bodies, because that's actually the limiting factors for most people in sports.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I 100% agree with you. You've pulled a look. You've gone ahead and seen the last section of my notes there. That's absolutely. This
is my job, Schuyler. I usually ruin everything.
No, it's not been ruined. It's very important to mention. It's absolutely important to mention. And another thing I want to point out is that people who are, listeners of this podcast might be noticing a lot of parallels between this episode and our anniversary episode where we discussed the science of race. And you might be seeing that, these categories that we've made up to, understand people to some degree aren't necessarily all based in science. And the ideas that, black people are better at sports, black people are better at this, that's based on cultural factors more so than anything else. Socioeconomic access to all of these things is honestly more important than pretty much anything else. I mean, yes, we could talk about like height and physicality and whatnot, but we'll get to that in a bit. That's not an issue in sports unless it comes to trans people generally. But I kind of want to go through a few more of these things, just to debunk some of these sort of myths that are being bandied about. I've heard about pelvic width being an issue. Pelvic width.
Oh dear Lord!
This reminds me of when you get people to try and define gender and sex, and they end up going to it is the specific apparatus that you specifically have the potential to produce the gametes of. That's where my bias lies. It's in the gamete production that might possibly happen.
And that's why I test everyone's gametes that I meet. Show me your gametes. Show me your gametes, sir or madam.
It's just if you're getting down to hang on, the pelvic width backs up my transphobia. Aha!
Yeah, but it doesn't, because pelvic width, there's no evidence to show that pelvic... I know you're not saying this, but there's no evidence to show that pelvic width has any effect on performance. But it does feel like it should have an effect on performance, because the pelvis, you've got a lot of bones about there, a lot of joints going in. It's in the sort of center of the body. It's something that you can see differences between, you could generally see difference between cis women and cis men, and so it feels as though that should be something that affects performance to an incredible degree, but
if there's one thing that I've learned, that's really it's a simple thing, but what Schuyler said earlier about if you have, yes, maybe you might have a bigger skeleton, but then you are also undergoing hormone therapy, which makes your muscles go away. And you have to see things. You can't take these individual metrics. You have to see it in the round. And the evidence is, are all the women's medals going to trans women? No, they're not. We've done the experiment. We can keep doing it, but has that happened? No, it has not happened.
I want to. So what you were saying earlier, Schuyler, about testosterone levels themselves not being, the most important thing. Luke, I want to ask you a question.
Oh, yeah?
Why do you think testosterone levels, one person having a higher testosterone level than another person, might not be terribly important?
Because of that thing where you have androgen insensitivity syndrome?
Yeah, so the idea that I'm trying to touch on here is the fact that not everyone is equally sensitive to testosterone as everyone else, my body may be more sensitive to testosterone than your body.
That's why you're so flippin' swole, Corey.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a swole boy. Yes. But testosterone doesn't have the same effect on everyone. And if we look at this from a trans perspective as well, you don't see every single trans dude having the exact same changes at the exact same times, when they're on testosterone. You don't see every single dude having the same dosage either, because it's very much down to how your body processes this hormone.
I know massive jack dudes who can't grow a beard. How does that work?
Do you want to know how it works?
Well, it's a reminder that biological sex is not binary, right? That there's so many different ways that biological sex comes together. And even within these supposed categories, people say, okay, fine, it's not binary. There's male, female, and intersex. Even that isn't comprehensive, because even within these categories that people think of as quote male or quote female, even those have diversity. Like you all just mentioned, those secondary sex characteristics, so things like facial hair, breast growth, Adam's apple, hairline and hair look, and muscle mass, all of these things, those also exist on spectrums, because not everybody has the same amount of facial hair, not everybody has the same amount of breast growth, not everybody has the same prominence of Adam's apple. All of these things are also different for different people, and a reminder that biological sex is not binary.
And I want to add in as well that we did an episode with Lena Norms, I think maybe probably a couple months ago at this point. Fantastic episode and lovely person. Go ahead and check that one out. But we were talking about polycystic ovary syndrome, which affects 6 to 12% of U.S. women of reproductive age, apparently, according to the Center of CDC. I don't know why I'm saying the whole name. You know what the CDC is, but according to the CDC, 6 to 12% of U.S. women of reproductive age, quoting them directly there. So if up to 10% or more of of women don't align with what is expected of the female sex, is it really fair to say, yes, women are the ones that have no facial hair and don't have these things, and men are the ones that have these? No, because there is incredible variation. But what happens when we see this variation is we stick a label on it and say, this is the bad one. This is a disease. This is bad. And look, yes, polycystic ovary syndrome can have, other effects, certainly. But the idea that it's not natural for, women to have, let's say, I use this
high levels of testosterone.
Yeah, high levels of testosterone, and I use this in the biggest air quotes, sort of masculine features or, male secondary sex characteristics, like, some facial hair or whatever. It is perfectly normal. There are more people with polycystic ovary syndrome than there are gingers. And you know what? I'm going to put it out there. Gingers aren't normal. I don't think we should really be. I don't think gingers should be competing in sports with everyone else.
I'm a statistical outlier. I don't exist.
I don't know.
I'm non-conforming.
Look, you're either blonde or you're brunette.
No,
and that's it.
You're right. I should dye my hair.
You bloody well should.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being so non-conforming. I was born this way, but they tried to. When I was born, they tried to dye my hair either blonde or brown.
Oh yeah, but they ended up burning your scalp or something, and causing lifelong complications because of their choices to make you align with what they wanted you to. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't get that metaphor, just look up surgeries on intersex children. Anyway, should we get back to the actual topic?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's more or less all the advantages that people tend to talk about. I mean, you might see people talking about grip strength. So there's been studies with trans
because
women.
how we grip things is really the primary way that we play sports, right?
Yeah.
Grip strength is really the only way.
I do a lot of gripping.
Grip strength is 1-to-1 with overall strength, and there's no other factors. Look, I'm sorry. There are no other factors that affect grip strength. Hand size? No.
Have you not ever seen women's tennis, Corey? They're always dropping their racket because they can't grip anything. Flying all over the court. Just, it's chaos. People in the crowd get smacked in the face with tennis rackets.
That study, I think, also didn't. They studied them before. There was one. I can't remember if it's that specific one or if it's one that's different. But one of those studies didn't take into account the variable of how much training had been done.
Yeah.
And so they studied the trans women. They got a baseline, and then they trained them right for 6 months or whatever, a year, and then they got another line, and they said it didn't decrease enough. You added training.
Yeah.
You added strengthening during that time. So of course it's going to be mitigated by this. So you need to also, the problem is so many of these studies are massively methodologically flawed, right? Because they're not taking the variables into account that could impact strength and other output.
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to be clear here. I was very much, because I know some people may not know that I was joking. I was very much joking. Grip strength is like BMI. Okay, the reason that we use it is because it's quick and it's easy and it's general. It can be useful to make general statements. BMI, as we've spoken about in an episode before, is a really, really poor way to to measure anything when it comes to anything more individual, right? Or when it comes to specific health. It's just a really easy way to look at someone's height to weight ratio, right? That's what it's useful for. Grip strength, if your hand is bigger, you're going to be more able to grip the testing apparatus, and your grip strength is going to appear artificially better because you're more able to grip the thing, right? Like that, grip strength is, and also your grip strength doesn't necessarily, having a better grip strength doesn't necessarily mean you have a higher overall strength. Yes, they're correlated. I'm not going to say there's no relationship between them at all, but having a higher grip strength doesn't necessitate that you are overall stronger. And as you said, Schuyler, as well, being stronger overall doesn't necessarily make you better at all sports.
I mean, I think I could grip the hell out of that little apparatus. Am I going to be better at breaststroke as a result? Like, I really don't think so.
I don't know nothing about swimming.
Well, you never swim like this.
You grip the water, right? You grip it and you cool yourself.
Like, I don't know what grip strength's going to do for me in the pool, but
I think I know what I'm talking about. I won most improved in swimming lessons when I was about 10 years old. So,
you must be an expert.
I think I am. Yeah. You grip the floaty thing and you kick as hard as you can. So if you can grip harder, you're better at holding the floaty thing.
You did win most improved, which you could have been coming from a very low place.
I was.
Yeah.
I was not good.
Yeah. And you got less bad. Congratulations.
Yeah, they didn't get to keep the trophy though. Couldn't grip onto it. No.
They gave it to you and you just couldn't pick it up.
Oh no. And that's why I was so bad at swimming. No. But I also, and we've been talking about the advantages conferred by, and okay, right, I'm going to say this. This is something that comes up. I really hate when people say advantages enjoyed by. I hate that.
They love it. They love these advantages.
It winds me up. And I get it's just a way that people say things. It's not, and it doesn't necessarily mean whatever. But I hate it. Anyway, so we've been talking about the advantages conferred by a testosterone-driven puberty. But, this gives the idea that cis men are overwhelmingly better than cis women at every single sport ever. And then you look at, ultra endurance sports or endurance sports and you see, oh, actually, wait, no, that's not even necessarily the case, right? Sports are all very varied and very different, right? Not all of them require, the advantages that are conferred by, being bigger or stronger or having more hemoglobin, in your body, right? Not all of them, you absolutely benefit from that, like darts, for example. Like, again, bringing up darts, which, why is that a sport? But like, you'd be the biggest, buffest bloke on the planet.
Snooker.
Billiards as well. Billiards.
Yeah.
Like, which, like, all of these things, it's like, okay, but are all...
being taller is good in snooker, to be fair.
Is it?
Yeah. Because you have to have, like, at least 1 full foot on the table. Sorry, I now sound like I'm defending the Turks. Yeah, so that, I suppose, being taller could help. But you can always use the bridge thing, so it probably cancels out.
Yeah, I think it's
why
fine.
You don't pay attention to just one thing at a time.
Yeah, but I mean, look, those are all of the advantages, right? Generally, it says here as well. In general, cis women have a greater distribution of slow twitch muscle fibers, which are more resistant to fatigue and more suited to endurance. So that's why over shorter distances, you'll tend to see cis men have better times than cis women. But over longer distances, that then starts to change a bit as the sort of short-term advantages are outweighed by the advantages of having more of those slow twitch muscle fibers. But the only reason I'm going to bring this up is so that people understand that it's not just a case of, yes, just men are better than women at everything because big, strong, and testosterone. It's not how it works.